Welcome to the Nordic Venture Show, your speed date with the coolest ventures, brightest founders and exciting things happening in the Nordics. In this episode, our venture date is with Freya, Innovations in Women's Reproductive Health.
It's easy to overlook the sheer power of the microscopic. But have you ever considered that the trillions of tiny microbes living in our bodies could be key players in something as fundamental as fertility and, a healthy pregnancy?
It's a mind-blowing thought, isn't it?
It really is.
And that's the fascinating territory we're venturing into today. We're going to take a close look at Freya Biosciences, a company that's asking precisely that question and developing some really innovative solutions.
Exactly. This deep dive is all about understanding Freya's unique approach to women's reproductive health. They're pioneers in developing what they call microbial immunotherapies.
Right.
Our mission really is to grasp how this groundbreaking work could impact some of the most pressing challenges women face, things like infertility, and that often complex issue of endometriosis-related infertility, right down to the critical concern of preterm birth.
Yeah, really significant areas.
And it's important we mention our insights today. They're drawn from the information Freya Biosciences themselves have shared.
That's right. We've really immersed ourselves in their website, their newsroom, the foundational science driving their work, their ongoing clinical trials, and the strategic partnerships they've established.
Okay.
So maybe to start, let's get a sense of the sheer scale of the reproductive health issues Freya is trying to tackle.
Absolutely. Because the numbers, they paint a pretty stark picture. Globally, about 1 in 10 couples struggles with infertility.
1 in 10, wow.
And that translates to a staggering number, over 2 million IVF cycles happening around the world every year.
2 million. That really highlights the demand for better solutions.
It does.
And the challenges, they extend beyond infertility too. Endometriosis, a condition many are becoming more aware of now.
Definitely.
It affects roughly 1 in 10 women. But what's maybe less widely known is that for around 40% of these women, it also brings the heartache of infertility.
40%, that's huge. Then there's preterm birth, which is really a global crisis. Affects more than 1 in 10 babies. And tragically, around 1 million of these tiny lives are lost each year. These aren't just stats, are they? They represent immense personal struggles, huge burdens on families, healthcare systems.
Absolutely. And, here's where things get really interesting scientifically. A recurring theme in many of these reproductive disorders seems to be this concept called dysbiosis.
Dysbiosis. Okay, can you break that down for us in this context?
Certainly. So think of the reproductive tract as this delicate ecosystem. It's home to a diverse community of microbes.
Right.
Dysbiosis is essentially an imbalance in this community. Could be too many of one type, not enough of another. The balance is off.
Okay, an imbalance.
In this imbalance, it can disrupt the local immune system, leading to inflammation.
Inflammation again.
Exactly. And increasingly, this inflammation is being recognized as a significant underlying factor in issues like the failure of an embryo to implant, infertility linked to endometriosis, and even what kicks off preterm birth.
So it's not just about having bad bacteria present. It's that this imbalance actually triggers an immune response that can actively interfere with these really crucial reproductive processes.
Precisely. That's a really important distinction. It's the consequence of the imbalances, the immune dysregulation and inflammation.
Okay.
And the prevalence of this dysbiosis in women facing these reproductive hurdles is quite striking, actually.
How common is it?
Well, for instance, estimates suggest about 1 in 3 women undergoing IVF have what's termed an inflammatory vaginal microbiome. So dysbiosis leading to inflammation.
1 in 3 IVF patients.
Okay. And alarmingly, maybe around 1 in 4 women experience dysbiosis during their pregnancy.
1 in 4.
Yeah, and that significantly increases their risk of delivering prematurely.
Those are really concerning numbers. It makes you wonder, what are the current options available for these women? It sounds like we're dealing with a really widespread issue.
But perhaps with limited solutions. Yeah, you've hit on a key point. Currently, the therapeutic options, especially those that directly target this underlying microbial imbalance, they're quite limited. David Stern, who's the CEO of Boston IVF, he's even spoken about the frustration. It's felt by both doctors and, of course, the women going through IVF because there's just a lack of truly effective, targeted solutions for this.
Which really underscores why Freya's approach feels so compelling. So tell us about their innovative work. What makes their approach different?
Right, so Freya Biosciences is a company specifically focused on addressing this exact gap. They're pioneering a novel approach by developing what they call microbial immunotherapies.
Microbial immunotherapies, okay.
Their central goal is to alleviate the chronic inflammation that seems to lie beneath many of these reproductive system diseases that uniquely affect women.
Oh.
By precisely targeting the immune drivers behind these conditions. They aim to restore a healthy balance within both the reproductive system and the local immune system.
Microbial immunotherapies, that sounds like a pretty significant departure from traditional treatments. Can you give us a clearer picture of how these might actually work?
Well, the specifics of their candidates are, still under development and in trials.
Sure.
But the fundamental principle involves using carefully selected microbial interventions. Think beneficial bacteria, perhaps, or components derived from them.
Okay.
The idea is to use these to sort of fine-tune the immune response within the reproductive tract.
Fine-tune.
Yeah, think of it less like a broad-spectrum antibiotic just wiping things out,
Right.
and more like sending in a specialized team, specific microbes, to restore order and calm things down. The aim is to move beyond general treatments and specifically address the microbial imbalances that are actually fueling the inflammation.
That makes a lot of sense. A much more targeted approach. And it seems like data is absolutely central to what they do. They talk about a human-first, data-driven approach. What does that look like?
Oh, absolutely central. They're using some really cutting-edge science to build a detailed understanding of women's health and disease in this specific area. Their data science platform is, well, it's incredibly comprehensive.
How so?
It integrates really deep analysis of the microbiome using both quantitative methods and whole genome sequencing.
Okay.
With the analysis of over 450 different proteomic immune markers, proteins involved in immunity,
450.
and over 600 transcriptomic immune markers. So looking at gene activity related to immunity.
Wow, that is an enormous amount of information to process.
It is. And crucially, they're not just looking at this molecular data in isolation.
Right.
They're combining it with real-world clinical outcomes and demographic data from over 600 women. Plus, they have experience from, I think, 100 full-spectrum microbiota transplant interventions they've studied.
So they're layering all these different types of data together.
Exactly. This rich multi-layered data set lets them identify very specific patterns and potential therapeutic targets with a much, much higher degree of precision than was possible before.
It's like moving from a blurry snapshot to high definition.
That's a great analogy. A high-definition, multi-layered map of the reproductive environment. This level of detail allows them to potentially pinpoint the exact microbial and immunological culprits, moving beyond that one-size-fits-all approach that, frankly, has often fallen short.
So this really deep dive into the data is what guides the development of their actual therapies. What's their lead candidate right now? Where are they in the clinical trial journey?
Their primary focus currently is on their lead candidate, which is being evaluated in clinical trials for treating infertility specifically in women identified as having a dysbiotic vaginal microbiota.
Okay, so targeted at that specific group.
Correct. They've already completed 2 proof-of-concept studies, Discover 1 and Discover 2. And they've also run a prospective cohort study in IVF, which has been really instrumental in expanding their understanding of relevant biomarkers in that population.
Sounds like significant progress. Okay, let's maybe zoom in on some of the specific areas they're tackling. We mentioned IVF and natural conception earlier. What's the link between reproductive tract dysbiosis and challenges there?
Yeah, as we touched on, research has pretty clearly established a connection between an imbalanced microbiome in the reproductive tract and, well, less favorable outcomes in IVF.
How does it interfere?
The immune activation and inflammation that result from this imbalance, they can interfere with critical stages, like the implantation of the embryo into the uterine wall.
Right, implantation is key.
Absolutely. And as David Stern from Boston IVF pointed out, there just aren't many targeted treatments available right now for women facing this specific issue. So Freya is aiming to provide clinicians with a much-needed tool to actually address this underlying microbial component.
It's like trying to prepare the soil before planting the seed.
That's another good way to put it. Imagine your immune system has an overactive alarm in the reproductive tract, instead of just broadly dampening the whole alarm system.
Which might have side effects.
Right. Microbial immunotherapies aim to send in specific peacekeepers, beneficial microbes, perhaps to calm down those overactive signals, restore the balance, and potentially create a much more receptive environment for conception, whether through IVF or naturally.
So they're hoping to develop a therapy that can specifically target this dysbiosis, potentially improving IVF success rates, maybe even helping with natural conception. That would be a game changer for so many couples.
Absolutely.
Now, what about endometriosis-related infertility? How does this microbial imbalance factor into that really complex condition?
Right. Endometriosis, as we know, involves that growth of tissue similar to the uterine lining outside the uterus. It causes pain, often significant pain, and frequently challenges with fertility.
Yeah.
What's becoming clearer and clearer is that this condition is also frequently associated with dysbiosis within the reproductive tract itself, an imbalance there too.
Okay, another link. And the current treatments for endometriosis, they mostly focus on managing the pain, right? Which is crucial, of course.
Crucial, but often not suitable for women actively trying to conceive. Things like hormonal treatments or surgery might interfere.
Exactly. And more importantly, maybe, they don't really address the underlying microbial imbalance that might be significantly contributing to their infertility problem in the first place.
Precisely. So again, Freya's strategy of targeting the dysbiosis could potentially open up a completely new therapeutic avenue for women struggling with infertility linked to endometriosis. It's addressing a potential root cause that current treatments largely overlook.
That makes sense. And then there's the incredibly important area of preterm birth. How does dysbiosis play a role there?
It's a critical issue. The stats around preterm birth are just sobering. And research has shown that an early inflammatory cascade, potentially triggered by dysbiosis during pregnancy. This inflammation can dramatically increase the risk of a baby being born too soon.
And current medical interventions, they mostly focus on managing preterm labor once it's actually started, right? Trying to delay delivery.
Correct. They're managing the crisis once it's happening. But those approaches don't really tackle the initial trigger, which, in a significant number of cases, might be traced back to dysbiosis and the resulting inflammation within the reproductive tract during the pregnancy itself.
So Freya's work here holds immense promise.
It really does. If they can develop therapies that address these early microbial imbalances and dampen that inappropriate inflammatory response, well, they might be able to prevent or significantly reduce the incidence of preterm birth.
Which would be huge on a global scale.
Absolutely. And it's also worth noting, Freya has indicated they're interested in exploring other women's health conditions driven by similar local immune dysregulation. So their platform technology could have even broader applications down the line.
It certainly sounds like they're tackling some very fundamental issues right at the intersection of the microbiome and women's health. Now, this isn't just theoretical, is it? What evidence exists to support this innovative approach?
No, absolutely not just theory. Freya has actively sought out and established collaborations with leading experts in the scientific community. That lends significant credibility.
Yeah, cool.
Well, we even have a quote from Laura Ensign. She's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. She emphasizes the growing body of scientific evidence that clearly links the vaginal microbiota, inflammation, and reproductive health outcomes.
Okay.
And she specifically highlights the exciting potential of Freya's approach to essentially reset the microbiota, a concept she believes could have a profoundly positive impact on women's lives.
That's a really strong endorsement from a respected voice in the field. And they're also working closely with Boston IVF, right? A major player in fertility treatment.
Yes, that partnership with Boston IVF is a really significant undertaking. Together, they are conducting a large-scale prospective study. It involves 300 women undergoing IVF.
That's the goal.
The main aim is to get a much deeper understanding of just how common these inflammatory dysbiotic vaginal microbiomes are, specifically within the U.S. IVF patient population.
So mapping the problem accurately.
Exactly. And this is considered the first and largest study of its kind in this particular group. It really underscores the need for more focused research in this specific area.
That kind of large-scale data collection is so crucial, isn't it, for truly advancing our understanding and developing effective treatments. And what about Freya's own clinical trial results? Are there any early indicators of success?
They have announced positive top-line results from their Phase 1 clinical study. This was for their lead asset, FB101, tested in women who were identified as having asymptomatic vaginal dysbiosis.
Okay. Phase 1, that's mostly about safety.
Primarily about safety and tolerability, yes. But these positive initial results showing it was well tolerated and potentially having the desired biological effect are certainly an encouraging first step in validating their approach in humans.
Definitely suggests they're on the right track. And it's also worth pointing out the significant financial backing they've received. That usually speaks volumes about the potential others see in their work.
Indeed. They successfully secured a substantial $38 million in Series A financing.
$38 million.
Which is a clear sign of investor confidence in their innovative approach and the potential market for these therapies.
And wasn't there funding from the Gates Foundation too?
Yes. Furthermore, they received a $10.4 million strategic investment from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Significant.
Very. And this specific investment is earmarked for expanding their Discover platform, specifically with the goal of addressing bacterial vaginosis, another condition linked to dysbiosis, and ultimately preventing preterm birth.
Okay, so direct funding for that preterm birth goal.
Exactly. It really highlights the perceived broad applicability and potential global health impact of their technology.
That kind of support, especially from an organization like the Gates Foundation, really underscores the importance and potential of the work Freya Biosciences is doing. Now, behind all this compelling science, there's always a dedicated team. What can you tell us about the people driving this innovation?
Well, the leadership team and the co-founders at Freya Biosciences, they bring together a really impressive array of expertise. We're talking individuals holding PhDs and MDs in highly relevant scientific and medical fields, immunology, microbiology, reproductive medicine.
So deep domain knowledge.
Absolutely critical for navigating the complexities of developing novel therapeutics, especially in this often underserved area of women's health.
And it sounds like this isn't their first rodeo, so to speak. They have a strong track record.
Absolutely. Collectively, the team boasts a wealth of prior achievements. Things like having conducted over 100 clinical trials in previous roles.
Wow.
Successfully bringing 8 different drugs to market. Contributing to over 35,000 citations in scientific publications.
That's serious experience.
It is. They also hold over 40 patent applications and have published more than 200 peer-reviewed articles in high-impact scientific journals. This extensive experience provides a really solid foundation for what they're building at Freya.
That level of experience really does instill confidence, doesn't it, in their ability to potentially translate these scientific insights into tangible, effective therapies for women. So as we begin to wrap up this really fascinating deep dive into Freya Biosciences, what would you say is the core message, the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think ultimately Freya Biosciences' central mission is about empowering women. They're doing that by developing truly innovative biomedical solutions aimed squarely at improving reproductive health.
And how are they doing that differently?
By directly targeting the root causes, that inflammation and immune dysregulation, that are so often linked to microbial imbalances within the reproductive tract. They're not just treating symptoms.
And the potential impact of this work, it feels immense. We're talking about the possibility of addressing some really significant unmet needs in women's health today.
Precisely. Their work offers a real, tangible sense of hope. Hope for improving outcomes related to infertility, hope for navigating the often challenging journey of endometriosis-related infertility, and that critical goal of preventing preterm birth.
It feels like a new frontier.
It really does. By focusing on this intricate, dynamic interplay between the microbiome and the immune system, they are truly pioneering a new and potentially transformative frontier in women's health therapeutics.
This has been incredibly insightful. It really highlights how digging into the tiny world within us can unlock solutions to some of the biggest challenges in human health. So on that note, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. As our understanding of this incredibly complex relationship between our bodies and the vast microbial world keeps deepening, keeps evolving, what other long-standing, maybe seemingly intractable health challenges might we be able to approach through similar innovative immunotherapies?
Interesting question.
And maybe more specifically, what role do you foresee the microbiome playing in the future of truly personalized, effective medicine, particularly medicine tailored specifically for women's health?
Thanks for tuning in. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, or your favorite app, and connect with us on LinkedIn for more stories and insights.